Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of MalleTALK. My name is Jim Bailey. I'm your host, where we have interesting discussion with industry leaders. Today, we have an old friend, Andy Harnsberger. Andy, how you doing?
Doing great, Jim. How are you?
Awesome. I'm fantastic. How's the start of school been?
Well, just like everybody else, we're kind of taking precautions and distancing still, and masks indoors, and but it's a very fluid situation. We kind of look at the stats and go with what needs to be done as it needs to be done.
Yeah.
So right now we're in person, which is I'm really thankful for that, and hopefully cases don't get so bad that we do hybrid or Zoom classes.
Right. So is the morale a little bit different, even though maybe the circumstances are kind of the same? Like, what's the vibe of the building?
I think it's really good overall. A lot better than last year. And not that I had very much morale problems with my studio personally, but just in general, the campus vibe is really cool. I think everybody's glad to be back.
That's good. Yeah. I know. I feel I've been to a couple schools around here, and I think the same thing has kind of applied. As generally speaking, people are cautiously optimistic. We'll say, they're taking all the precautions they need to, because nobody wants us to go any longer than it needs to. But concerts are starting to happen. We're having PASIC, which is going to be fantastic.
Awesome. Yeah.
I can't imagine the energy that's going to be in that room when everybody gets together for the first time in a couple of years. Or to be able to see any of your heroes play,
Right.
It's gonna be really great.
Definitely.
You're going to PASIC?
Definitely, yeah.
Awesome, good. Well, we'll see you there. So, what you and I have kind of planned to talk about is really I'm really excited about. I think there's some really cool topics for teachers that will be insightful. Obviously, anybody that's going to be on the podcast watching can ask questions. At any time. We'll kind of feather those in as need be. But let's start here. Let's start with just a little bit, I think in order for us to have a substantive discussion about your current teaching philosophy and your techniques to develop students, be that their emotional state, their mental state, their musical state, their physical ability. It's always helpful to know a little bit about the person behind the we'll say the podium or the MJBs. So tell us a little bit about your background, kind of some of the experiences maybe that shaped who you are today, how you approach music, how you approach teaching.
Sure. Well, I'll start out by saying that I started on snare drum and drum set, and all the way through middle school and high school, I had drum set and snare drum lessons, and that's what I focused on. I was very much a drum set player and just really thought that that's what I was going to do the rest of my life. And I went to Virginia Commonwealth University, and my plan was, of course, to be a drum set player, but you had to take traditional percussion lessons. And while I was doing that, it was very eye-opening for me, because I'd never played any keyboards. And I mean, if you put my mallet on a C, I could probably play a C scale. That's how bad it was. And I couldn't read pitches very well at all. And so I knew I had a lot of work to do in that area.
Yeah, I can identify with you. I grew up with a lot of focus on rudimental percussion, a lot of focus on drum set. I did enough mallets to keep my band director off my back. I really didn't see the light until much later in my percussion career. Got to college, similar situation. I was marching. I think at the time I was marching drum corps. So I had drum corps hands, but my eyes were way behind, and it was really, really frustrating for me to have to eat that humble pie on a daily basis, to go back and slow everything down and play things that sound maybe a little bit nursery rhyme. Everything's in a major key or maybe a minor key. Talk to me about that part of your experience, because that's a pretty brave thing to do, to go from here's my ability level, on these instruments, but if I really want to do this, I've got to kind of start building from scratch.
Yeah, it was really frustrating. Like you said, I was really thankful that I had some mentors that helped me a lot. Some upperclassmen that really, they sight read with me. They helped me learned different etudes, and my teacher was also very, very patient. Donald Bick was my teacher. And, it was just a constant be patient, be persistent, and be productive. Get in the practice room and do it.
Mhm.
And so that's what I just knew I had to get in there and read as much as I could. And I would sight read an hour a day.
Mhm.
And I had a guy, my roommate, that sight read with me an hour every single day.
Wow.
And just one day, all of a sudden, it was like, wow, I'm really doing it.
So what were some of the earlier pieces or earlier books that you worked out of when you were first really faced with, okay, I'm going to do this every single day?
Well, I mean, when I was sight reading, we always read out of the Goldenberg book. That was the Bible back then. And my teacher had these two books called Jazz for Juniors and Jazz for Seniors. And if you did not have an hour's worth of material for your lesson, you sight read the rest of the time.
Right. Yeah.
And I was sight reading every week,
Yeah.
And so he would pull out violin duets, flute duets, Jazz for Juniors. And I mean, of course I'm stopping left and right, but he just keeps going. He's like, you got to dive back in, get back in there. And so, I mean, it was just crammed down my throat, really. It was just, you have to do this, and you're so far behind. And I'm a very competitive person, and I could not stand being the worst at something, much less not the best, but I was the worst. But at the end of my freshman year, it started to turn around, and I was really making progress.
Yeah. Well, that's cool. That's interesting. For me, it was a Goldenberg book, of course, which is, again, a lot of major, a lot of minor. It's interesting with the jazz book, because now you're faced with a lot of different types of, like, harmonies, tonalities, sometimes modalities and things like that you might not run into in the Goldenberg book that will help you. It would help your ear, because the stronger your ears are, the stronger your eyes are going to be. Right.
Yeah. Absolutely.
The Bono book was another one for me.
Bono,
just, big, thick resource for, because reading an hour a day, that's a lot. It doesn't maybe not sound like a lot, but it's a lot. It's a lot of reading in one day.
It is a lot. I mean, I typically tell my students to sight read 10 to 15 minutes a day.
Mm-hmm. And even that feels like an hour.
That sometimes feels like an hour. Yeah.
Oh man. That's so the process of sight reading, obviously I remember it well. There was a visual recognition of the notes, right? And then of course there was just the ability through your peripheral vision to make sure that you're playing those notes in the right places. You're getting good sound. Was there anything that really helped you get over the hump there? What was that kind of connecting the kind of the intellectual to the actual?
Of course, we did a lot of exercises out of the instruction course for xylophone by George Hamilton Green, and doing all of those exercises in every key, and basically memorizing the patterns. Like if I could memorize C to G and back down to C, when I see it, I don't have to read every single note.
Yep.
And if I play that exercise enough, I don't have to worry about hitting the right notes. I'm going to hit the right notes. So I can keep my eyes focused on my music and not really worry about where I am on the keyboard.
Yeah.
So that's why we do a lot of the George Hamilton Green stuff here at Lee, because if you do it enough, you recognize those patterns and you don't have to read every single note.
Right. I'm pretty sure I have both of those books right over here.
Yeah, everybody should have them. Right?
Absolutely, yeah. So what were some other milestones that you had kind of in growing up? Obviously, spent a lot of time playing drum sets, spent a lot of time playing snare drum. What were some of the things that you really think, looking back, wow, that doing that really made a difference, really helped to open up a new window to how I perceive music?
Well, I've got a few things if you've got time.
Hey.
So my sophomore year, my freshman year was just this big learning curve and just trying to get it together. And then my sophomore year, there was going to be an audition for the Richmond Symphony in Virginia. And Don Bick was the principal, and he was making everybody in the studio take the audition. So we all prepared all of these excerpts. It was a substantial list. And I mean, lots of people coming down from different cities, Baltimore and DC, to take this audition. This was a real job, third chair percussion. They don't have those anymore. a lot of places, but back then it was a big deal. And I wasn't expecting to do anything at this audition, but I really practiced hard. I mean, I learned everything, practiced my butt off. And at the end of my sophomore year, they held the audition. And I think one of the things that helped me in the audition was in the first round, there was drum set. And so a lot of the players who maybe, and I'm not slamming anybody, but a lot of orchestral players that maybe didn't have as much drum set experience as me, maybe had never read a chart. A lot of those guys were eliminated because they didn't have the experience.
So there was chart reading. There was chart reading. Okay, yeah, because that's a whole different type of reading.
Yeah,
that's a completely it's almost like if you can do those two things at the same time, the ability to look ahead and to think in the phrases, and it's I almost equate it to like watching hitting a ball coming off the pitcher's hand. You watch the wind up, you watch the ball come off the fingers. You're seeing that figure that you need to play in 3.5 bars, to set the band up for the next phrase.
Right.
And you're looking down those other, because there's, rest of the measure in most charts is just a bunch of slashes telling you to play time. But good experience nonetheless. But continue.
So I ended up winning the audition, and then all of a sudden I was playing with the Richmond Symphony, and I didn't really feel like I had any business doing that, but it was one of the most amazing things that ever could have happened to me, because I never really listened to orchestral music. And then in the process of preparing for the audition, listening and doing all kinds of listening preparation and score study and all of that stuff really opened my eyes and expanded my musical palette, let's say. And then obviously then I had a job, and I was working. And not every concert needs a third percussionist, but I was working a lot.
Good. So
that was really a very positive thing for me. My next year, I started playing congas at the VCU dance department, accompanying dance classes. And there used to be this guy that would sit outside of the music building, this Cuban gentleman, and he would just play congas all day, and he would let anybody join him, but you had to start on clave. And if you played out of clave, he would take them away. You had to get back of the line. And eventually I worked my way up to being able to play with him and sit on a drum and play with him. And so that was another eye-opening experience. So my freshman year, I thought I'm going to be this drum set guy. My sophomore year, I win the audition. Oh man, forget this drum set. I'm going to be an orchestral musician. I'm going to get a symphony job one day. And then I start playing in the dance department, and I'm like, God, I love it. I play, they move. This is what I want to do now. Then later on that year, Lee Stevens came to VCU and did a concert and master class. And of course, I was blown away. And then all of a sudden, that's what I wanted to focus on. And then a couple years later, we had a guy coming down from Baltimore to teach, and he was teaching me jazz vibes. And then I was like, man, this is what I want to do.
You're easily inspired.
Yeah. It's just, everything was good, everything was good. And then I went to Eastman, and I just wanted to study orchestral rep and timpani with John Beck.
Yeah.
And I thought when I left Eastman, I was going to be a timpanist. And now I'm playing marimba everywhere. So I think the moral of the story is that you don't know what you're going to be doing in 20 years, and every musical experience helps the next one. Everything that you do musically shapes you into the musician that you are today.
Absolutely. Yeah. That was your step ahead of me. I was going to go, well, what's the moral of the story here is those all add up, and they all give you perspective and insight and allow you to interpret or communicate, or at the very least understand. And especially with percussion, the things that draws me to percussion is it's not just one thing. I don't know that I would have been interested in it if it was like a trumpet. Here it is. Here's your thing.
You're only going to play cymbals.
Right. Yeah. No, I want to beat on everything.
I'm going to play everything. Yeah.
Yeah. So let's fast forward to today a little bit. And one of the things that you and I had talked about previous to this talking about, which I think is a really interesting conversation to have, is repertoire selection. And there's a lot of different ways that people go about selecting repertoire. There's some kind of mistakes made and lessons learned in that process. I know I've judged a lot of solo and ensemble contests. I've seen a lot of recitals where, it kind of made me feel bad for the student because they're playing a piece of music that they're not really set up to play yet. And that might be because they're not supervised and they're just really ambitious. God love them. But nonetheless, in order to really nurture the growth and the development of a musician, I won't even say a student, because I think that that's a lifelong pursuit. You need to pair up well with, a piece of music and make sure that you have the right piece of music, something that, kind of fits all the requirements and has all the compulsory. So can you speak a little bit about just overall your philosophy on repertoire selection, and then maybe get into a little bit of, as I said before, the mistakes made, lessons learned, maybe not your mistakes, maybe things that you observed, maybe a little bit of both.
Yeah. So when I was a student, the first marimba piece that I played was Yellow After the Rain, as was many people from my generation and before and after.
Mine as well.
And my teacher's idea of teaching four mallets, like I said, he was an orchestral player. He did not play four mallets. He said, here's four mallets. Here's Yellow After the Rain. Get your friends to show you how to hold four mallets. And, I think there's a big problem in education right now. I think this is a big thing, in that teachers are much more concerned with students playing rep than developing and mastering the technique. For example, if students are starting with four mallets with Yellow After the Rain, they might play that, and then their teacher might throw them right into Two Movements by Tanaka or Mexican Dances by Gordon Stout. And first of all, Yellow After the Rain is not a beginner piece. I hope everybody in the world can hear me say this. It is not a beginner piece. There are so many techniques used in this piece that the student must master before playing it. There's single independent strokes. There's single alternating strokes. There's double vertical strokes. There's rolls, for goodness sake. And the student is way better off isolating these techniques and strokes and mastering them first before picking up something like that. The other thing is, Yellow After the Rain is a 5-minute long piece. That's way too long for a beginning piece. For someone who just picked up four mallets, not knowing any of the technique. And
I went through that same, that's exactly happened to me. I found it in a cabinet. I said, that looks kind of cool. I went over. It took me forever to learn the beginning, because I'm learning the music, I'm learning the notes, I'm learning the movement, I'm making sure the mallets feel good in my hands.
Absolutely.
And then I'm like, okay, I don't know if I can do the rest of this, because there's how many more pages left?
Right.
Point well taken.
It took me almost a year to learn that piece. I don't feel ashamed to say it now, because now everybody knows that I couldn't read music when I first got to school. But, and then there was nobody to teach me the strokes. It was all trial and error. And I think a lot of students are going through that. And I just think that there are so many more resources, better resources out there now to start beginners that we didn't have back in the day, So that's first. Second, you can't just go from that piece into some of the more advanced literature. You just can't. Even if the student has excelled and has great hands, there are so many technical elements that students haven't mastered yet. And the reason you don't want to pick a piece to develop the technique is because the student can develop all sorts of bad habits while they're trying to play above their level, and even injuries. And it can be debilitating injuries in some cases. If you don't have if the student doesn't have proper supervision.
Right.
So you want to have enough technique so that you can think about the music and not what's going on in your hands.
Right.
So,
I think your point about going back and almost dissecting the individual movements, hand movements that are in Yellow After the Rain. And I'm thinking about, that's why I think one of the reasons, I'm sure, why Method of Movement was so popular, because it actually kind of laid all of those out, because there is a lot packed in there. And if you don't know what you're looking for, if you're new to four mallets and You pick up a piece because it looks nice or it sounds, it sounds appealing. You heard somebody play it, but you're not really familiar with what the movements are in there. It's the same thing as a percussionist going in and playing a rudimental piece that doesn't know the rudiments that are in the piece of music.
Exactly.
And I had that same experience too. I played, the very first solo I ever played was called Hell in the Wabash. I forget who even wrote it. I found it in the back cabinet, my junior high, and I had to learn. And I was fortunate. I was diligent enough in practicing to figure it out. And I asked a lot of questions, but man, how much easier would that have been? And how much better would I have mastered that piece had I already known the contents of the solo?
Yeah, I totally agree. And there's probably several factors. There's probably several reasons why this happens. And for high school kids, it might be competing in solo and ensemble, or college auditions that forces this kind of rep-driven practicing. And I suppose for college teachers, it might be this idea that we have to have a jury piece at the end of every semester, which that's a whole nother discussion. So it just becomes that the rep is the most important thing, not the technique. When in reality, learning the technique is far more important, because eventually the student is probably going to be teaching somebody and teaching that to a young student. And if this is what they did, was learn rep and develop bad habits, then the cycle just continues,
Yeah. It's learning the technique, I think, helps you not only enables you to master the piece, but for me, one of the big things I'm really passionate about is getting kids to understand how to communicate. You might understand the piece. You're looking at it. You've played it. You've studied it. That doesn't mean that anybody on the other side of your instrument or on the other side of the stage has any idea at all. So you have to be really clear in communicating the intents of the composer.
Right.
And the mood of the composer and what the music means and how it's supposed to move and where the tension and release points are and all that stuff. And it's a lot. That's higher level thinking, and all of that will be more easily facilitated if you take a few things off your plate to think about,
Exactly.
And I see that an awful lot where I end up spending most of my time talking to students, not about, if I'm teaching like a marching band situation, we're not talking about vertical alignment or, first left-hand diddles. We're talking about bigger concepts. We're talking about communication. Are we all saying the same thing, especially in an ensemble setting? What we're talking about right now is solo, but you take that concept and you magnify it. And if you don't have everybody on the same page, you can't communicate.
Right.
You need to communicate as one organism.
Yeah.
So if you get a new student that comes to the university, of course, you've seen them, you're familiar with them to some degree because they've auditioned for you. What's the process like of starting to lay, literature or a plan in front of them? How does that work? Is there a single kind of a one size fits all solution? Does it depend on the student? Can you tell us a little bit about what you do with that?
Yeah, of course, everybody that comes in is a little bit different. Everybody has a different background, different experiences, but everybody that comes in gets a packet. And in the packet is a daily routine. And I call it a daily routine because it's supposed to be done daily. And basically, the daily routine is supposed to be a warm-up, but it's also supposed to be technique-driven. And you're supposed to be working on achieving good sounds on the instrument, as well as developing your technique. And your daily routine can be constantly evolving depending on how your technique develops.
Right.
So if you're working on such and such piece that has such and such permutation, you incorporate that exercise into your daily routine. Mm-hmm. And so you do this packet every day. So the goal is to constantly be working on technique as you pick new literature. So now I mentioned that I'm all about the technique, okay, but I do want to mention that I do feel like technique is key and it's first and foremost, but you can't always practice technique and expect to be able to play musically if you never address any musical ideas, obviously. Right. So you have to, as a teacher, you have to be diligent and you have to find pieces that have musical value and musical issues that your students have to address to get them thinking. But I think that is a very gradual process, and it can't be first above the technique, because like you said a minute ago, if you take that off the plate, they can really focus on the technique.
Mm-hmm.
And then when they're performing something, they can think musically. They can achieve musical ideas because they've already mastered the technique.
Mm-hmm.
If you haven't mastered the technique, if you can't play a one-handed roll, don't play Variations on Lost Love. If you can't play a one-handed roll, don't play Words Unspoken because it's the first bar. I mean, you just don't choose something like that if you don't have the technique to do it, because you're not going to convey the music like you said. An intentionality. You have an intention to convey to the audience what your mood is, what the intention is of the composer. And if you can't do those things physically, then you can't communicate that. And that's why I think technique is so important. And the musical ideas are selective, and those are introduced gradually over time.
So going back to your packet, that's interesting. When you developed your packet, did you develop it with certain pieces or certain styles of pieces in mind, or was it just kind of a, here's kind of your arsenal of tools in your toolbox that you may eventually need to use depending on, what kind of music you're going to engage?
Yeah, the packet is developed for beginners and to introduce them to basic stroke types, and to do it in a certain order so that you're warming up larger muscles first and then breaking it down so that you're going to smaller muscles later, so that you can get good blood flow, and so that you're not just diving in to something that's going to be too hard for your hands right off the bat.
Right. And create a bunch of tension and
exactly. So it's designed from a health and wellness perspective as well as educational. You need to know these strokes, but let's do it in a smart order so that you're, by the time you get to the end of it, you're good and warmed up, and you can go ahead and start your practice session.
Yeah. Interesting. And every freshman gets that, or is that something you give? How's that? Who gets those?
Every incoming student gets it, no matter if they're a grad student or transfer student or freshman, or if I have a high school student. Everybody gets the packet.
Nice.
And it not only has marimba daily routines, but it has snare drum and timpani as well. And, as you know, a lot of that stuff transfers back and forth. But it's just to develop. These are certain skills you have to have. You have to be able to do these. And you have to be able to sound good while you're doing it. You have to be able to be relaxed and get good sounds out of the instrument, not just on marimba, but on snare drum as well.
I mean, to me, that is part of the technique. It doesn't matter if you do it and your hands are tight and you're not allowing the instrument to resonate and speak, and you're getting a bad tone, then you don't have the technique.
Yeah. And I think that, a lot of kids come from programs in high school where it may be heavily marching band focused, and they start out just by cramming notes. There's not a whole lot of warming up because there's not time to do it. This. There's not time to really warm up properly, but you assume that the student is stretching before they get there, which they're not. And then, the warm-ups typically aren't really warm-ups. They're more exercises than they are warm-ups. And so they're not used to this kind of thing. Then when they get here and we talk about the packet, I don't need to do the packet. Everybody feels like they're Superman. And
I felt like that too. I will tell you about, in 1994, it was my first year at Cavaliers, and, I was a new guy, and I wanted to show that, hey, I belong here. I got a great set of hands. I get my drums off the truck. I'd put my drums on. I go start playing. Of course, there's people around, so you want to kind of, put on a little show. Well, halfway through that year, I started getting some really bad tennis elbow in both hands, and I had to completely stop and change the way that I warmed up because of that. And to this day, it's really never went away. It flared up really, really bad in '95, the next year. And I fought through it because I was trying to audition for a spot as a section leader. I remember one day I was driving home from camp, and my elbow was so inflamed here, the tendons that run to your thumb, that as I moved my thumb, I could hear the tendons in my elbow squeak.
Oh
I mean,
my.
it was terrible, and I just fought through it because I'm like, if I take any reps off, then this guy has the edge over me. Thankfully, I quickly learned the importance of making sure that I stretch, that I warm up nice and relaxed, and then I'm always aware of what I'm asking my hands to do.
Mhm.
And I think that's really, really important. Now, you've done a lot with health and wellness, so it seems to be like this is a perfect segment to kind of go into, what's your kind of your daily drills for keeping your hands healthy.
Well, first of all, you have to get your hands moving every day. I mean, and as a college teacher and performer, there's sometimes just not time to practice every day. There's not time to get mallets in my hand every day. And so that's the first detriment right there, is just not being able to stay active. I'll tell you a little story. Back in 2005, 2006, well, even before that, like when I was really heavily active doing marimba tours, I would do 30, 40 concerts a year average. And no problem. I was Superman. I was young. I could do it all. And then 2005, 2006, I just thought, I'm going to go for it. I'm going to book as many concerts as I possibly can. And I booked 80 concerts
Oh my
during an 8-month season. And May 5th, 2006 was my last concert. It was at Morehead State University. And a week later, I sold my marimba.
Oh, wow.
So I was mentally just done, sick of playing marimba, sick of being on the road, sick of setting up the marimba, sick of playing the marimba. My hands were a disaster, because a lot of times you get to these gigs and there's just not time to warm up, and you just have to jump into your recital.
Mm-hmm.
You get in, you load it in, set up the marimba. You might be able to play for 20 minutes after you've been on the road for 9 hours.
Right.
It's not. Everybody thinks it's glamorous, but it's really not. And so I sold my marimba and I moved to the beach, and I took 4 years off, almost 4 years off. And during that time, I really had to get my head together, was number one, but I had to get my hands together too. I didn't play marimba for a solid 3.5 years. And that really was probably the best thing that ever happened to me, was this wake-up call, like, you're not Superman. You cannot keep doing this to yourself. And so that year was really when I started, okay, I've got to see an occupational therapist. I've got to learn some stretches. And that was the article that I wrote for Percussive Notes, was stretching for pain-free performance. I'm sure you can find it on the pas.org site. And just learning how to stretch, because nobody had ever talked about it.
Mm-hmm.
And so that became a gradual rehabilitation. Just how can I get my hands back to where they were before I destroyed them? And how can I also feel good again about playing and want to actually play again?
Mm-hmm.
So I still have days where it's like, man, I didn't practice today. Tomorrow I'm going to feel old,
Right.
And I think it's really important, especially as you get older, just, you've got to keep your hands moving. You just got to keep them moving. There's a maintenance that you have to do, or you're going to lose some of the skills that you acquired when you were Superman.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's really the big thing. Now, also along with that, I ice my hands every night, and I have therapy mitts. They're just gloves. They go right over the hand, and they stay in my freezer. And anytime I feel the first little bit of anything, I will ice my hands. 20 minutes every night, especially when I'm playing a lot. When I'm playing a lot, it's every single night. Even on the road, I'll fill up a trash can in the hotel room full of ice, and I will submerge my hands.
So do you do anything, asking for a friend over here with elbow pains? Do you do anything back here? Is all your fatigue and all your pain?
All of
here
my issues, Jim, are up here, but I can tell you just from experience that ice is the key to heal.
Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. Do you
And
go through all the kind of, I think it's 4 stages of icing where eventually it's like a cold, it's burning, and then numbness.
pain, yeah, just like you
Yeah.
feel pain and then
Yeah.
like you want to quit, but then you feel the
Mhm.
burning and you want
Yes.
to quit, and then all of a sudden you can't feel anything,
Right.
and then it's time to stop, and then it reverses the order
Right.
as your hand warms up again.
That
And
sounds like a fun thing to go through every night.
well, we're all sort of masochists, right?
I mean,
Uh,
first of all, your instrument's like 7 feet long. I think it's pretty inherent in us as percussionists.
yeah, but I mean, I do it because it's worth it to me to have some longevity. I
Mhm.
want to keep playing. And I know that if I don't do it, I'm not going to have that longevity. I might have to quit next year. Um, and, I just need to, the big thing that I need to do for myself is to just find more time to be able to practice.
Mhm.
And, if I get another MJB, I can have one at home and I can practice every night.
I know a guy. You'd mentioned, I think when people think wellness and health, the first thing they think about is obviously, physical health and wellness and injury prevention and things like that. And I don't know who I can attribute this to, but I've always kind of thought about health in terms of like teaching students in 3 parts. And I just call it hands, head, and heart. Right. So what are we doing to nurture and develop their hands, technique, exercises, things like that? What are we doing to develop their head, intellectually? What are we doing to make sure that they're thinkers? They can think in the moment, make decisions, and be aware and change. And then what are we doing to nurture that so that they don't want to quit and abandon the instrument?
That's
Although
awesome.
although going to the beach sounds pretty cool. Are there any things within that I always do this with my students, right? I make it a point, to talk about, the importance of taking a break or not getting frustrated or stressed out.
Oh,
What's some
yeah.
of the other besides physical, some of the other health related things that you feel are important?
Well, it's funny. We're going to talk about this tomorrow in studio class. So you've got to get your mind ready to absorb information, which means you've got to take care of yourself by getting enough sleep, which for college students sometimes that's a big issue.
For sure.
Well, for an adult it's also an issue. Sufficient exercise, but also getting the taking care of yourself as far as your diet is concerned. Garbage in and garbage out, as they say. If you eat McDonald's and fast food every day, you're probably not functioning at the highest level that you could. We do talk about taking breaks. If you're going to be in the practice room for an hour, make it 50 minutes and take 10 minutes to walk around the building, to get a little blood flow. I think it's important for everybody to get some kind of exercise every day. It increases your blood flow, which in turn increases oxygen to your brain, which in turn increases your brain function. So if you're not getting exercise, you're missing out on the optimal function of your brain. Drinking water is another thing that we talk about, because you see kids coming in with energy drinks and they come in with sodas, and again, water energizes your body at the cellular level, and it's not just a caffeine boost.
Right. I was a big skeptic of that, for a long time. I used to teach middle school, and we started at 7:05, and I had 76 graders running around my room at 7:05 in the morning. I'm not a morning person, first of all. Second of all, the night before, I was probably up till about midnight. Drumline rehearsal ends at 9, close down the building at 10, drive home, unwind. So I drank a ton of coffee.
Yeah.
Eventually I got away from that, lost a bunch of weight, got into drinking water. And I was amazed at how, when I started getting tired, my first inclination was, man, I need a cup of coffee. But what I did do instead was I reached and I grabbed water, and I realized, I'm like, it's strange. I'm more awake now, I was a big skeptic of that. So I'm a huge supporter of that now. And I try, although I don't do as much as I want to, I try to drink as much water as I physically can.
Yeah. Now, I mean, it does increase your trips to the bathroom, obviously. And I'm not saying that I don't drink caffeine, because I'm hugely addicted to caffeine,
I love
but
coffee.
I drink twice as much water when I drink caffeine. Have you ever had those days where you drink too much caffeine and it reverses and you're just super worn out?
Yeah, and then you drink more and you drink more. Yeah, I try to be really, really careful these days about how many cups I have in the morning, and then I try to abstain for the rest of the day. My old routine was, and I'm not kidding you, I would get up and I called it my friend's cup. Like, remember the big coffee mugs that were like this big?
Yeah.
You know, I would drink 2 of those in the morning. I would get in my car. I'd drive to school. The first thing I do when I drive to school is I'd put on an entire pot of coffee, which is 12 cups. I'd drink that before the end of the day. And then probably have another cup around 3 or 4 o'clock just to get me going, so I feel like I can get through drumline rehearsal.
Oh my gosh.
And then big surprise, I couldn't get to sleep at night.
Yeah.
So yeah, these days I do 2 small iced coffees in the morning, you know, kind of as my routine of just kind of getting up and just getting my head right. And then it's to either water or I do like caffeine-free tea, which I was just drinking a little bit ago. And when I drink water, I drink it with lemon all the time because I love that. Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I think it's good that you're teaching that, because there's nothing more frustrating than investing in a student to develop their technique and their their repertoire list, and then all of a sudden they get so burnt out that they walk away. There was one other thing that I wanted to talk about, kind of in the middle between like preparation, literature selection, and that. So let's go back to that just for 1 second, just because we dove into a health topic, because it was the right time to do it, and it was a good conversation. The literature is selected; it's the right piece of literature. Okay, it fits the students' kind of growth requirements. It's good in terms of a curriculum piece for them as they're developing as a freshman or sophomore, or junior, or senior. Now it's time to make sure they're using the right tools. So talk to me about how you go through Mallet selection. What are some considerations for what influences those decisions? And, give us a little peek into how you go through that process.
Sure. Well, first thing is, what instrument are you playing on? And how does that instrument respond to certain weights of the mallets and certain hardnesses? So we talk about that. We talk about how the mallet feels in their hand, and also what kind of character are they trying to elicit from the piece, you know? So, and I'm definitely going to make a plug for Malletech here, because I mean, the selection is unbelievable. You've got so many different things to choose from. You can see them on my wall back there. You've got so many different things that you can choose from, that you can have a bright sound, a dark sound, a heavy sound, a light sound, and mallets that sound good all over the range of the instrument. So, I mean, there's just, and the reason that I have those mallets back there is that my students try them out before while they're working on every piece, so that they can hear and feel what they sound like before they make an order. Right. And I think that's really important. If you don't have a good variety for them to experiment with, they're going to pick the wrong thing, most likely.
Yeah, there's almost too much out there for people to. I feel like people have a difficult time. I mean, that situation to be able to go to your wall and basically see the entire catalog, pick it, play it, experiment with it, I think is invaluable. For most people, they don't have that.
Yeah.
And if they're lucky, they understand the construction of the mallet and how that translates to sound.
Yeah, if they're lucky. If they're lucky. I mean, most students, to be honest, probably aren't doing that much research into what makes the mallet, what is the core of this mallet, and why does it sound this way, with the manufacturing process, etc. And so they go to the Steve Weiss catalog and they just read a description of the mallet and they say, "Oh, this sounds good. I'm gonna get this one." Or the teacher says, "You need this." They get it. It's not really the right perfect thing. It's not really the perfect fit, because maybe it sounds good in one octave, but then it doesn't sound good in the lower register or the higher register. The list goes on. But yeah, I mean, I'm really fortunate to have all of those mallets and to be able to just say, hey, why don't you try this? Why don't you try this? And believe me, I'm not suggesting the Harnsberger mallets for everything that my students do. That's my go-to. It's not their go-to.
Right. So what about, you mentioned, obviously, how does the weight of the mallet, how does the hardness factor into what the music calls for, the instrument you're playing on, maybe even down to the type of instrument? Is it a wide bar? Is it standard bar? Is it keylon? Is it rosewood? Is it Paduk? I assume also the room factors into that as well.
Yeah. What venue are you going to be playing in? And how big is the hall? How much do you have to project? And if you're using something that's on the relatively light side, are you going to be able, as a player, put enough weight behind that lighter mallet to make it fill up the hall? I know that I can, but some younger players may not be able to do that. They may need a heavier mallet to be able to fill up the sound.
Mm-hmm. So early on, they'd maybe hopefully wheel that out into their concert hall or their auditorium stage and do a test run to make sure they're not making those decisions the day of.
We're pretty fortunate here that we always get a chance to get into the hall before we play.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Moving along here. You got some current projects coming up. You got some things that are on the docket for you, some releases. Why don't you just kind of take us through some of the stuff that's on the horizon through the end of the year?
Okay. Well, first off, September 24th, we have a big faculty gala concert here at Lee University, and Dr. Caitlin Jones, also a Malletech artist. We're playing a new duo. It's the world premiere of a duo that I wrote called In the Midst of Darkness. And we have already recorded this piece, but we've never played it live. So this is going to be a first.
Is that going to be live streamed?
All of our concerts are, yeah. So I'll make sure I post that. Yeah.
Yeah, please do. We'll make sure we share it.
After that, I've got a few performances throughout the semester at different universities and such, and same for the spring.
Mm-hmm.
But the big things that are happening, we did a big recording project back in May, and those videos are set to drop in December.
Oh, so, great. Okay.
And that's for my current CD project. So 2016, I did my CD Phoenix. Mm-hmm. And then last year I did my CD Unbreakable, which was all of the stuff that I did for the PASIC Showcase concert. And now we just trying to keep it going, just trying to keep it moving. When there were no live performances last year, it's like, what are you going to do? Mm-hmm. So we're just trying to keep it moving and do as much recording as we can. So I wrote a bunch of new pieces and pulled out some old pieces, and In the Midst of Darkness is going to be on there. That's one of them. I've got another duo that I wrote for Adam Blackstock called Serpent. That's going to be on there, and some new pieces that I'm excited about as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll keep an eye out for those for sure. I really enjoyed when you dropped Unbreakable last year. That was cool. Yeah. All right. It is customary to end the podcast asking a question that is just completely non-percussion related. So usually it's tell me something about you that's not on your faculty page. Tell us about a guilty pleasure that you have that maybe people don't, not a hobby. Like, of course, I know you're into fitness and you exercise, something that only close friends of Andy Harnsberger would know about. What are some, give us a little insight into the non-percussive world of Andy Harnsberger.
Okay. So here at Lee, we have a mascot. His name is Chester. That's him in front of the MJB with the Harnsberger mallets.
Nice. He's got good grip. I like that.
He's on it. If you go to Chester Pomeranian on Instagram, you can follow him and you'll see him playing Mexican dances. I spend a lot of time with Chester because I bring him down here to the studio. He's a therapy dog. The students love him, and he really brings the calmness in. Mm-hmm. He just lets them pet him, and he's our little mascot. And so Chester, I have 13 or 15 posters with Chester on them in the hallway outside my studio. in the percussion wing, and there it's all a picture of Chester with a motivational quote underneath. And I'll try to upload those to my website so that people can go and visit those and download those pictures.
I want to see every single one of those.
They're hilarious.
I want a coffee mug. I want the mouse pad. I want the whole thing. I remember that's hysterical. God, that's hysterical. I remember it was International Bring Your Dog to the Work Day, and I had marked it on my calendar for social media, and I think you had shared a post, and we had made a whole thing about like what piece do you think he's
that's
playing,
right.
and but wrong answers only, and I think one of mine was like Yellow After the Snow. and there was so many other funny, like, you know, it was a really fun thing, but it kind of made Chester a star on our Instagram page. So thank you.
He's very famous. Yes.
Awesome. Great. Listen, Andy, on that note, this has been absolutely fantastic. I appreciate you really sharing not just your background, your history, but a lot of really good substantive discussions about education and philosophy, health, wellness, all that stuff. So always great to speak to you. And I'll be looking out for not only your videos, but I'll be looking out for that Chester coffee mug right around Christmas time. I'll send you my address. All right, for everybody, thank you again for tuning in. We'll see you next time.
Thanks.